work with the ideas of recognition from the Frankfurt School, critical theory, the ideas of recognition, the ideas of justification put forth by people like Rainer Faust, recognition by Axel Honneth. So the idea was to try and come up with in vivo categories from the data. And I worked with something called grounded theory, constructivist grounded theory, which helped me come up with a theoretical framework emerging from the data itself.
Okay. Dear friends, I will ask Preeti another questions, but for you, I want to repeat it again that if you have a question, you can just put it here in the comment box. And I think I will give importance to your questions. I will first put your questions to her because I think your views are also important. There has to be a two-way communications. Preeti has done BA in mass communication and journalism, and also political science from St. Francis College for Women in Hyderabad. I have already told you that she did MA from School of International Studies, JNU, and then PhD from that Department of Communications, Hyderabad Central University. She also got associated with UNESCO, and also she also had a time with Annenberg, Oxford Media Policy Summer Institute. So you could see she has got a lot of experience. If you have questions, you could just put it here and I'll bring it to her. So Preeti, I'm now asking your deliberative policy ecology approach in your book. I think you have said that, and I'm quoting you, that community radio becomes a site that registers these markers of heterogeneity, the thickness of culture, and claims and contestations over power and resources, and the interfacing of the region with the rest of the world and its politics. And then you are saying that deliberative policy ecology approach you have taken. So many young friends may be interested in doing research in journalism. So I am asking you, please elaborate it, that how your approach, deliberative policy ecology approach, why this approach is important, why you have given importance to you, why you have picked it up, and what is the main argument of this approach? Yes.
Yeah, so I didn't pick it up from anywhere. It is something that came from a constructivist grounded theory analysis of my data, where you actually build theory from the data, right? So the theory emerged from the data in that sense. But I was working, in fact, one of the people who influenced my thinking a bit was Siddharth Mallavarapu and his ideas on constructivism. And I was working with the idea of constructivism, and I was looking at the construction of policy, the contextual construction of policy. But the difficulty with constructivism and constructivist theories is that while they privilege the social construction of any kind of policy or technology or any other process, the realities that we have to deal with are to do with the structures and the systemic attributes. So how do you reconcile something like various divergent policy perspectives with what are dominant administrative structures, administrative systems? So the process of reconciling all of this led me to search for a heuristic device. I read through across disciplines to try and understand how policy making or policy or even human rights literature, how one studies communication rights by placing it in the larger context of human rights, etc. How these initiatives have been studied. So there are theoretical frameworks like the transnational epistemic communities. There are theoretical frameworks that look at transnational advocacy coalition framework is one. Similarly, the idea of political society and civil society theorizing is one. People like, Partha Chatterjee, etc. have written about it. So I was looking at these heuristics to understand how you can build a theory that explains my data and the phenomena that I have studied. However, none of these, while each of them was explaining certain aspects, I always felt that other fluid markers in South Asia were being left out. They were not fully explained by these heuristics and these frameworks, which is what led me to look for or try and build something called the deliberative policy ecology approach. And I call it an approach because I don't want it to be a definitive kind of a theory, because it is open to interpretation, reinterpretation in that sense. But what does this mean? The idea was to try and do what is called a deliberative policy analysis. A deliberative policy analysis happens when you're trying to understand things from the perspective of deliberative democracy theorizing, which is a growing field in political philosophy now. Deliberative policy studies has been there for a while now. I think this was in the 2000s that the book was written by Hajar and Wagener, and they talk about how such a policy analysis can be conducted. So I was deploying these lenses, and I was able to synthesize all of them towards developing what is called the deliberative policy ecology approach, where I understand the deliberative potential in such an ecology, where the idea is to try and see if, for example, this particular policy process for community radio, how much of potential does it have for the quality of deliberation? And I mean, this thinking of deliberation and debate very much comes from JNU. I mean, despite differences, we've always had healthy discussions and debates on campus, and that is the idea of a democratic system. And the idea was to try and map or understand the potential for deliberation in the policy ecology for community radio. That's very simply put what this approach is.
But Preeti, your critique may say, some of your critics may say that giving too much importance to deliberation will put, the issue of power and the issue of dominance to the back burner. So how would you respond to that criticism? Can a person who is socially, economically deprived, can that person has power to engage with those who are privileged?
Right. So, I mean, this is a debate that is very much within, I mean, this debate between Habermasian kind of communicative action and Foucauldian, kind of understanding of power is definitely there. But the idea is to still say that the deliberation is possible, because there is an intersubjectivity, and it does not, while power structures exist, there is an intersubjectivity that continues to exist as well. So this is like negative dialectics, right? So the idea is to try and look for subversive spaces. I mean, despite power structures, you constantly find that in a democracy, there is always conversation happening. And the idea, I mean, one can choose to constantly critique the power structure, which becomes a systemic critique constantly. We cannot go beyond a critique, or to open up these spaces for actual deliberation and to do some kind of a policy, what is called a policy activism, that Das Friedman talks about. So the idea was very much in that vein, to continue to bring that lens to these kind of spaces, instead of constantly critiquing the system, because that's not going to be of any use. One can critique the system, but unless one creates spaces for deliberation and continues to work democratizing or deliberative democracy goes beyond the idea of electoral politics, right? It is a more nuanced, it's a more robust kind of theorizing of democracy, where the idea is to say that it is a work in progress always. One never reaches the perfection of this idealistic kind of a democratic setup. And while there may be phases in the life of a democracy where power structures are hold sway and there are authoritarian tendencies like we are seeing now, the idea is to say that these spaces continue to exist and people will continue to exert pressure on the system to create these spaces, and that is the effort to privilege these voices.
No, but some people may argue that the same media, the same public opinion is being created by the elite to create hysteria against, let's say, minorities, against working classes, and this government, which is seen by many as right-wing government, they are hugely supported by people. They have not come from the sky, and you will find that so much support is there for, let's say, attack on minorities and for the religious politics. So how that is possible? How that is possible?
Because India is a great case study right now to understand deliberative democracy, right? While you have the downgrading of the the markers of democracy, where we've seen that international organizations and all these human rights kind of networks are saying that India is now an autocracy, elected autocracy, or a downgraded partial democracy. You still have protests, anti-CAA, NRC protests. You have the farmers' protest is happening while we are speaking. It's another thing that the mainstream media does not give space for it. The idea was to try and locate community media or other kinds of alternative spaces and to bring them to light. In fact, one of the things that I am currently working on, and like I had mentioned to you earlier, is the idea of hated speech. In the life of a democracy, you will always find people who are constantly speaking up only to be shut down or hated in some ways by the system. And the idea is to study what kind of speech that is and why is it hated, and how do these people build resilience and are resisting these systemic forces. And that continues to happen. I mean, one cannot turn blind to these positive voices. And the idea is to privilege that in research.
Okay, Preeti, now we will discuss this issue at some other point. Now, let me move on to another question. Your work has also been very much critical of Eurocentric approach.
Yeah.
So we know in history and in let's say social sciences that looking at the history of the world through the eyes and through the experience of let's say the West, and then expecting that everybody will imitate the West, that is called Eurocentric approach, or which is called Eurocentrism. Now in media, when somebody is critiqued by saying that, oh, you are taking Eurocentric approach to media, so what does it mean? What does it even mean in media? Yes.
In media, it means that you are borrowing, the typical 4 theories of the press continue to exist. But
what are they? What are they?
The authoritarian free press theory and the authoritarian model or the libertarian model. These are some of the theories that have traditionally existed. But also over time, we see that, the usual theories of political economy or realist theories, they continue to hold sway in media as well. And we do a great job of borrowing these theories and just transplanting it into the South Asian or the global South or the Souths in plural, the experience of the Souths. Now, when I say that my work is a critique of that, I don't mean that I want to, the way it is a critique of that is because my work is rooted in data coming from South Asia without any presuppositions. I work with the data first and the theory evolved from the data. So the deliberative policy ecology approach is organic in that sense. So it is a contribution from South Asia to the rest of the world in terms of media studies and global media policy theorizing.
Okay. So in your book, you are also talking about 3 approaches: development approach, post-colonial approach, orientalist approach. So what are the merits and demerits of these approaches? Young students, young friends who are watching it, they may not be aware about these ideas. So please also educate them. Yes.
Sure. So the developmentalist approach is an old one, and it comes with colonial modernity, right? The fact that you have to go and develop somebody in order to make them equal, or I don't know if that's the idea, but that is the rhetoric. But the idea was to, go and save somebody and to get them to evolve on par with where the West is. And that is where a lot of development funding came from, and that comes with colonial modernity and this idea of developing the rest of the world in that sense, or the colonies. Now, the developmentalist approach in the post-colony has been such that it's been intertwined. You have international organizations and other countries, especially during the Cold War, investing in India. But India also had its own development approach, right? You have the idea of national development that came from a Nehruvian kind of a model of development, where we spoke about dams as temples and all of that. It came from that kind of a model. So the development approach in that sense has been very top down.
Preeti, that Nehruvian model of development, we have also studied it, the development approach to communication, that the
Right.
media, television or radio can play a very important role in bringing the society from backwardness to development. So it has also some kind of resonance from the earlier colonial approach, where the people sitting at the top, let's say in Delhi, in planning commission, they know what is best for, let's say, you sitting somewhere in, let's say, Andhra Pradesh. The people from the Delhi will decide what to grow and what not to grow and how to develop. Yes.
Yeah, so the idea was that, I mean, this is to say that there are continuities between the colony and the post-colony in that sense. And I think Dirks talks about how technology becomes a site where there are the markers of these continuities between the colonial regime and the post-colonial regime continue to exist. And that is seen very much in the media space and in the technology space. Now, then came a paradigm shift sometime in the 1980s, where the participatory paradigm became very popular to development, where people were going and bringing the communities that they were working with on board participatory projects. And this came from the understanding that while you have neoliberalism taking shape after the Cold War and countries opening up their economies to capital, at the same time you need to save, you need to sort of shift the focus. Basically, it's about devolution of the state, the powers of the state. The welfare state is getting devolved into these participatory projects as well. That was seen again. So my contention with both of this was that it did not really engage with the inherent capabilities of the people. You're constantly trying to save somebody, whichever approach it is, which is why I located it in the idea of deliberation. The idea is to say that there is an inherent capacity for dialogue and deliberation that exists in the people without them needing to be, you just need to create spaces for them and bring the lens onto them and give them the mic. Basically, it's about passing on the mic for deliberation. So that's where my orientation towards any kind of social change comes. Having said that, now what is the post-colonial and the Orientalist approach? Orientalist approach has existed during the colonial times when you had Orientalist societies, which were basically a Eurocentric understanding of India. Whereas
and imagining India as the perversion of Europe.
Yes, and unfortunately, as a corollary to that, in some ways, you have the very nativist approach as well, right? Where you're talking about an India which goes way back in time, and you have this great legacy.
Idyllic happiness. Yes.
So
glorious past.
Yeah. So these are some of the concepts I was working with. So when you look at something like community, it becomes very important to say that while you are privileging indigenous knowledge or the native's voice, you don't essentialize them. You don't essentialize any kind of orientation towards making them the representative of something. The idea is to create a plural space. That was the idea, instead of saying that it is this versus that. I didn't want to fall into these binaries of this versus that or which is better. The idea was to open it up for plural kind of articulations.
Okay. So, and about post-colonial?
Post-colonialism has been there, and the idea of hybridity, and Baba has spoken about it, and there's been so much work on the post-colonial. While I draw, it gave me some interesting questions to work with. Because I was looking at continuing systems of broadcasting from the colonial regime to the post-colonial, to the post-colony, not necessarily post-colonial in that sense. But it gave me some interesting questions in terms of understanding continuities. But what was very fascinating for me was to engage with decoloniality. How do you juxtapose that against the post-colonial? What do you mean by decoloniality? Decoloniality is rooted very much in an organic, ground-up kind of an understanding of the world. The idea is to say that everything can't be reduced to the idea of the post-colonial, because post-colonial is also carries with it the weight of having to constantly work with the registry of the colonial, right? The decolonial, in that sense, is to sort of do away with an epistemic decolonization process. We are able to do away with existing structures of imperium, and you're working with I won't say, I don't want to romanticize indigenous knowledge and romanticize that view as well, but truly, I mean, there is a lot of wealth of knowledge in indigenous systems, and to sort of bring that to the fore was the idea.
Preeti, I think you are also these days engaging with, let's say, digital media economy. I think,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that, digital media economy? Can you
Digital
elaborate?
economy is the economics of the digital realm. I mean, I shouldn't be speaking too much because I'm just working on a book chapter with another professor from Jamia. But the idea is to say that to try and do an intellectual kind of history of the digital media economy scholarship in India and on India, by people who are looking at the meso level, the macro level, and the micro level. Looking at the affective economies, the localized experiences of, let's say, something like a mobile phone uptake, or how people engage with the mobile phone how the disenfranchised engage with the mobile phone at the rural areas or at the localized level. That's one example of the micro level. At the meso level, to understand platforms like Facebook, and I'm hoping to, I've just, something will be published by mid-May on the consolidation of big tech in South Asia and in India, and how they're colluding with the government and big business players like Reliance, like how a Facebook is buying stakes in a Reliance, for instance. And at the macro level, we engage with data economies. We have the personal data protection bill and the non-personal data report that the government has come up with over the last couple of years to try and understand the contours of the data economy. So these are some of the rubrics that we are working with for the chapter.
Okay.